Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. We got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to be talking about the documentary film Stop It, The Great Taking, delving into the Federal Reserve and beyond with James Patrick. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness.
America is in trouble. The Federal Reserve can be summarized in 3 words. It's a scam. I never realized it was the most profoundly corrupt institution in the world, pretending to be honorable.
The custodians are empowered to borrow the securities out of the pool without any limit at all.
And it's a partnership between the bankers and the politicians, and they create money for all the citizens of that country.
The secured creditors have absolute assurance that they will keep the client collateral in the event of insolvency. And this is the shocker, not your insolvency, but insolvency of the people that secretly used your securities as collateral.
So in a sense, what they're doing is converting your property, your assets, into money.
They don't need your money. They can create unlimited money. It is about subjugation of people.
Who was it? Kissinger said a long time ago, if you want to control people, you control food. If you want to control nations, you control oil. If you want to control the world, you control money. And I think that's the plan. And now, right now, it seems like they're using the climate change as the mechanism to be able to step in and take control.
So I've written this book, The Great Taking, to put on the table a very sophisticated structure designed to take essentially all financial collateral globally.
Everything you want to do in life gets translated at some point into a monetary value. So if what you're using as a monetary value is not your property, you have none. You have nothing. You are a slave.
We're in a hybrid war that is open-ended.
The average person is doomed. They have to wake up. They have to learn a little bit about what the real world is about. They have to stop buying into the myth.
And we are back. Powerful trailer. It includes greats like G. Edward Griffin, who I have known now, for the better part of 2 decades. Time really does fly. And The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is his seminal work on the Federal Reserve, is really several decades old at this point. James, first of all, for my audience, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you decided to tackle this subject.
Well, I have been trying to figure out who's really running things, and it really goes back to the central banks and these international banking families that basically control governments. And I am a documentary filmmaker and investigator, and did a film on the COVID issue called Planet Lockdown, and then another one on the Dutch farmers. And about a year and a half ago, I met David Webb, and he heard him give one of his first presentations on the subject. And he really filled in a lot of the blanks for me on what are the biggest problems in the financial system, what are the risks that the biggest banks have really caused for the worlds and the markets. And so this film we did is really kind of covering this issue, but also tracking the first efforts to reform what is probably the biggest financial crime story in history, which is basically that the biggest banks in the world have been using everyone's stocks and bonds as collateral on their own trades for the last 40 to 50 years now.
So
And
basically,
this
my
is,
entire lifetime, no big deal. No
yeah,
big deal whatsoever. Let's talk about that.
yeah,
Because obviously, most people, I mean, they're on the peripheral. Let's be honest. They don't even know the baseline of politics. They know rah, rah, rah talking points, a little red here, a little blue there, a whole lot of celebritard culture everywhere. And they don't get that the Federal Reserve is a private agency that is actually outside of government. So I want to start there. Powell, prior to the inauguration of Trump 2.0, was actually asked if he was asked to step down by Trump, would he? He flat out said no. And the reporter, a little bit perplexed, probably not astute on the issue, is like, wait a minute. Are you telling me you wouldn't have to step down if the president of the United States asked you to? And he's like, yes. He's like, no, I don't have to. Of course not. So can you kind of explain to people how this agency is set up, number one, that it's outside of our constitutional government, and how really it has no oversight but itself?
yeah. The Federal Reserve is like a public-private partnership between the government and the central banks. They basically set up this sort of model goes back like 300 years to the Bank of England, but it's basically the banking industry regulating itself. It kind of comes from the issue of fractional reserve banking, where when you put deposits in the bank, they take the money and lend it out, and then keep a little bit on reserve. And this kind of system, if you have freely floating free banking, they call it freely floating fractional reserve banking. Some of the banks tend to explode if they get over leveraged. So the banking industry self-regulates. They got together and formed a cartel where they will all inflate or deflate in a unified policy together. And that's the main role of central banking. And really the oligarchs behind that control these rates is what's a really unfair, makes it a very unequal system where, having that kind of foreknowledge and that kind of insider ability really causes all kinds of economic problems.
Wait,
But
can we just stop for a second? Can you kind of just explain? Can you kind of just
Huh?
explain to people before we gloss over it? You basically just talked about open collusion between cartels to set rates. All right?
Correct.
For those that don't understand what that means, every time we hear that the Federal Reserve is going to cut rates, etc., that plays into the price of everything. Now, obviously, this would not be enabled unless the big players all sat down together and, like you said, had private meetings and talks about what they wanted to do that essentially has little to do with a free or fair market of competition reality. In fact, this is the complete opposite. Can you go into that just a little bit before you go further?
What about it that?
Well, the idea, like you just talked about all these economic problems. You literally have these banks sitting in private meetings discussing what the rates are going to be outside of the government officials. Then government officials that are working with these people, all right, and lobbying for them, they get the information via their lobbyists. They're able, that's how they're able to have, a $200 million portfolio 8 years into a $150,000 salary. So that's one aspect of it. Number two, there's no real regulation. Number three, these people who are in the banks are never not only economically but criminally accountable for their actions. And we, the people, have this agency that can't be regulated that literally is telling us what rates are going to be, that decide how much our food is going to cost, how much our gas is going to cost, what our electric is going to be, what our mortgage payment is going to be, et cetera, et cetera. Am I leaving anything out?
Yeah, it's a cartel. It's basically, I mean, that's what government is there for, to really control markets for the biggest players in the markets, the biggest firms. But this kind of interest group that runs the central banks is really at the top of the food chain. They're the biggest guys in the world, you're talking trillions and trillions of dollars. And so um, one of the just everything is really there in DC just to control the markets. I mean, that's basically what you can just assume. And you look at who were the directors of these agencies and what was their prior employment. They were usually lawyers for the biggest firms. But the biggest international banking interest is definitely the biggest and kind of running the whole thing. I think you ever heard that Kissinger quote? He says, "If you want to control the people, you can control the food. If you want to control the whole continents, you can control energy. If you want to
Pretty
control
sure
the
it's
world,
in one of
control
his
the money."
books.
Yeah.
It's not just a clip. I mean, it's not just like an obscure clip. It's like right in his book. I mean, he lets you know who he is.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that aspect a little bit because, in the trailer, for instance, you highlight the idea that because of the machinations of power that are currently in there, you don't really have private property. And even in the trailer, you have the one guy who's like, that can't be true. And then certainly he talks about reading that one piece and going, well, I read it the same way. Guess I don't have private property. You got G. Edward Griffin jumping in, and he's like, guess what? If you don't have private property, that's the Fourth Amendment, folks. It's not only your persons, in other words, you as a person, but the things you're allowed to own, your property. If you don't have that, you're a slave. So can you kind of talk about that aspect? Because I don't think people get that. And look, I want to own stuff. I certainly have a whole bunch of widgets, gadgets, even technology here talking to you. But I am apprehensive on the larger things like home ownership, not just because it's so expensive to own a home these days. I'm going to pay property tax if we're still in this same methodology for the rest of my life on my own property. And I, again, have little to no way to determine what that property tax is going to be. And guess what? If I don't pay it, they take away my stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, private property is basically the basis of society. I mean, if you own your own body, you have exclusive ownership over your own body, and if you don't, then you're a slave. Some would argue, I would argue myself that if income tax violates your right to your own the fruits of your labor, property tax puts a levy on all of your property, and if you don't pay it, they can just come and take it. So what this film is about, and this broader issue, is that the banking industry's basically started dipping into everyone's stocks and bonds, everyone's life savings, and to surreptitiously use those securities as collateral on financial bets, so on derivatives contracts, and once it happens, once your assets get swept up into one contract, they get reused and used and reused again, is what they call collateral chains, rehypothecated collateral chains. So this kind of all started in the 70s. In 73, they created the Deposit Trust Clearing Corporation in New York. They argued, 1968, there was this paperwork crisis. It was so complicated to have all these share certificates. So why don't we just keep all the stocks and bonds in pooled form, in pooled and fungible form in DTCC in New York, Deposit Trust Clearing Corporation. Then from there, the bankers started to dip into the DTCC and surreptitiously use all the securities as collateral. And then I've been told by industry players, really in the 80s, this got really big and widespread. And then in the 90s, they legalized the practice through reforming Article 8 of the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code. And they did this by creating two new legal concepts. One was that they substituted direct ownership of a security with a contractual claim on a security. So you have beneficial ownership, not legal ownership. You get all the economic benefits of owning a share, but like voting, dividends, but you don't have clear legal title. The Central Securities Depository, the DTCC, has legal title. And then they said DTCC can then allow its members, essentially the biggest banks on Wall Street, to freely use those securities, and then the secured creditors of those derivatives contracts that they encumber your securities into have priority in the event of a failure of the derivatives market. The secured creditors of the chain of contracts that they encumbered your assets into have priority ahead of you if they fail. So it's like they work some financial alchemy there screwed you out of your out of your assets, and then said, oh well, if the shit hits the fan, you're last in place to get, only get, the code says you get a pro rata share. The securities entitlement holder has a pro rata share after what the securities creditors are get. So it's just that needs to change. The way these codes was written, and it says like you have property rights, except all the time when you don't. So there's a legal strategy we've been using just to strike the exceptions, which kind of undermine the underpinning to the legal structure they put in place.
The documentary film is Stop It, The Great Taking. Go check it out right now. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the fractional reserve banking aspect as well, because what he just described actually goes beyond that. I mean, when you think about it, folks, what is really backing your money, especially when you put it into one of these institutions? How much at this point are really zeros and ones? We'll be back with more Making Sense of the Madness after this. Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here. Let you know that Making Sense of the Madness is changing for a bit. Soon enough, we're going to be moving to a more commentary-driven show, which airs live on my socials. Now, we hope to get some minor sponsors at $1,000 a piece each month and move it back in the direction of what you just saw with those great interviews with people who have done deep research. Now, until then, I really do need your support individually as well. Consider donating via the links down below, especially the Buy Me a Coffee, $5, $10, $15. It does mean the world to me, and it keeps this broadcast moving. Thank you so much, Bermas Brigade, for your continued support. And we are back. We are joined by James Patrick. So, James, let's talk about that aspect of it. Now, you put your money in there. Again, they're pooling it. They're reinvesting it. They're taking the derivatives and profits of that. But at the same time, once they take your money, how much of that money do they even have to have at any given Sunday in the vault? That's the real question, because they don't have to have 100% of it. We all know that. I deposit $100,000. Do they have to maintain 10,000 of that? 5,000? Are we down to 1,000? Are we down to magic numbers on a dicka-dicka-doo? What's the reality of what a bank actually holds from what is actually put in?
Well, I mean, in this country since 2000, there's no reserve. So in COVID, they lowered it to zero. Essentially, banks make loans out of nothing.
That sounds financially sound to me. I mean, that's great. So backed by zero is what you're taking. Fantastic. Continue.
Well, I also discovered, I'm doing a doctorate on this now, but I discovered that in the Eurodollar market abroad, that's been going on since the 60s. That basically banks will give a loan out of nothing. They have to take collateral to make sure it'll be repaid back. And if the loan isn't paid back, then any loss of the principal will be a loss on the books of the bank. So it's not to say it's an easy business what the banks are doing. They have to find creditworthy loans to give them out. But yeah, definitely. I mean, whatever the practices of the industry are, if they just start giving a lot more, I mean, you see these bubbles in price levels. It's not a sane way to run a market, because it's not a real free market of things. It's like these freely floating leveraging institutions that then can create these speculative bubbles wherever they put the money. So definitely, I think the solution to the question of how to reform money would just be to let there be a free market of money and not have government issued enforced money that wouldn't normally be accepted by others in the free market. Yeah, but the fractional reserve banking analogies, and I think important to understand this issue. So for the last 3 centuries, when you go put money in a bank, this came back from the goldsmiths in the Middle Ages, where people would store their gold at the goldsmith in exchange for a fee, and then over time the goldsmiths started lending out the gold that people weren't collecting, and So that's basically what they started doing in the 70s with everyone's stocks and bonds. They basically had to get them into a pooled fungible form like bank accounts, and then they can just dip into them when other people aren't looking, and then later legalize the practice. You know, in the fractional reserve thing, they would get these the monarchs to approve of these, to license banking, basically.
So before we kind of move on to your thoughts on Trump 2.0 and whether we're going to get any reforms and what to expect in the financial markets, let's get into some of the individuals in the documentary film and why you use them. Because obviously you have OGs like G. Edward Griffin, but you also have not only other financial experts, but you have legislators and government representatives in there. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the film really followed in the 2024 legislative effort to fix this issue, and so it was shot in South Dakota and Tennessee, where bills were introduced and heard. Um, so I think right now we just need to like educate people on this issue because it's a bit complicated, or people get a little flustered by it. But essentially, we really need everyone to call their state legislator and tell them they need to have their property rights to their own life savings restored, and that the bank should not be allowed to play with all of your life savings, all your stocks and bonds, your 401ks, your pension funds. This involves even the state's money, and so this is a huge issue. And if we can get these laws passed to restore the property rights, the derivatives bubble will have to correspondingly wind down. So right now there's like in DTCC, there's like $89 trillion of stocks and bonds. And in Euroclear in Belgium, there's like a little over 40, like around 40 trillion. So there's like 120, $130 trillion of stocks and bonds in these two central securities depositories. And then from that, they've leveraged it up 15 to 20 times into about $2 quadrillion of derivatives contracts. So now this derivatives
that is overwhelming. Like, you just say that to me, I want to check out right now. I want to go walk my dog. I don't even want to think about that. $2 quadrillion, where you're telling me about 90% of it doesn't exist in any way, shape, or form other than in the investments that we say it's part of, correct?
Yeah. So fueled by the free use of everyone's assets, the derivatives market is bubbled up into $2 quadrillion, and the risk is that will pop, and then there'll be all these collateral calls, these spirals of collateral calls, where the secured creditors of all those derivatives contracts will say, hey, to keep this contract alive, we need more collateral posted. And now from BIS documents, Bank of International Settlements documents, this is like the central bank of central banks in Basel, Switzerland. They've in some BIS documents, they've talked about how there's basically an automated global collateral management system to efficiently utilize and allocate collateral, everyone's stocks and bonds, internationally, transnationally, cross-border, and that. So the risk is that by automating these things, also they've after 2008 they mandated these new entities. They said, oh well, derivatives are so risky, so they present a systemic risk. We need to create another system, make all derivatives contracts cleared through central clearing counterparties that basically sit above DTCC and Euroclear. So when you make
is that like the idea that's like the fake regulation? That's like, we're really concerned, we're going to create this agency that's going to have oversight, but in reality they're all still in the pocket and just allowing this to continue until there's a burst, right?
Well, it just they said, oh well, the derivatives market is risky, so why don't we centralize it through these central clearing counterparties by law? You can't have a customer, like a counterparty, on the other end of a contract. They want them all cleared through the central clearing counterparties, and that basically concentrates the risk. It doesn't make any economic sense, market sense. There was no market demand for it. So by regulatory fiat, they created these new entities above, where all the risk now is concentrated there. And the issue is that now that it looks like what they were set up for is to concentrate the risk and be able to collapse the system in a clean, controlled way. You can collapse the CCPs. So if people get over speculative and some of the derivatives market melts down, that's one thing. But now if you centralize all of the transactions through these central clearing counterparties, if the central clearing counterparties fail, the entire market fails. So they're creating an unprecedented amount of risk, which serves no sense other than to basically, it looks like, just to collapse the market in a clean, controlled way.
So is that it at the end of the day? Do you believe that, I mean, when you're talking about these type of numbers, and we are talking about kind of moving into the future, do you think that this is for a controlled collapse of the entire system to bring in digital fiat, which we're already seeing on a massive level, not just through the talk of CBDCs and obviously Bitcoin, Ethereum, the multitude of meme coins, but really a system that was internationalized through the IMF and the SDR unit when they just started creating fiat out of zeros and ones, being that special drawing right that people, again, have no idea exists, has been in play, 15 plus years now? And again, to move to a blockchain-based system that's a lot like that, do you believe this is a controlled demolition of the global economy?
Yeah, it appears like this is basically the plumbing of how you'll own nothing and be happy. So we do see the UN, and they're talking about 15-minute cities. There's the C30 initiative that mayors around the world have signed, talking about a much poorer world where people will have 3 pairs of clothes, 1 vacation every few years, and don't leave your 15-minute zone, and you can't eat steak or butter or milk. So it's like strange. These things sound crazy. There's like this kind of detached from reality, sort of dystopic view proposed. But when you look at this plumbing here, this is basically, this undermining of property rights is basically the plumbing of how it looks like they're trying to engineer, the you'll own nothing and be happy, to collapse the markets, push people down into a lower standard of living. And then these sort of digital control system, CBDCs, these sorts of things may be easier for them to push on people. So it's important people understand these things and don't play dumb, or don't allow these things to happen, because it's if they do, we're screwed.
Yeah, no. Once you have a global digital fiat track trace database currency that can be turned on and off at any moment, it's over sauce. Stop it. The Great Taking. You can go check out the documentary film and the interview series right now. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk Trump 2.0 and what that means for not only the American but the global economy as well. More Making Sense of the Madness after this. Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here. Let you know that Making Sense of the Madness is changing for a bit. Soon enough, we're going to be moving to a more commentary-driven show, which airs live on my socials. Now, we hope to get some minor sponsors at $1,000 a piece each month and move it back in the direction of what you just saw with those great interviews with people who have done deep research. Now, until then, I really do need your support individually as well. Consider donating via the links down below, especially the Buy Me a Coffee, $5, $10, $15. It does mean the world to me, and it keeps this broadcast moving. Thank you so much, Bermas Brigade, for your continued support. And we are back with James Patrick. So let's talk a little Trump 2.0. Look, I think the guy's imperfect. I think obviously this is way better than Joe Biden. Recently, we saw the markets tank quite a bit. I'm not even a Muskernuts fan. I'm not a Tesla fan. I'm none of those things. I would love to see the Federal Reserve audited by Ron Paul. Great rhetoric. Don't know if it's going to happen. I'd love to see the abolishment of the IRS. I think you would be a lunatic if you did not want to see that type of thing. And hey, let's go into Fort Knox, because the last time we were there, again, I was born in 79. It was before that, and it's not like we got a real audit. We basically got, a media play where a few senators and government officials went in there and they peeked around and then they came out and talked to the media. Now, again, I don't know what any of this really constitutes in reality, if any of those things are able to happen. So take them one by one, those three things. Number one, is there any possibility of those things? And number two, what happens if, in fact, they do those things?
It'd be great if they did do those things. I'm a little skeptical. We're just being kind of played as with the dog and pony show, like Carol Quigley with his book Tragedy and Hope. He mentioned in the '60s that these big international bankers they field the right and the left and the right and the left. And these politicians throw the rascals out. They go through this ritual every 4 years or 8 years, and to kind of appease people, and pit us against each other, But I'm a little more skeptical of what's going on. I don't think I don't really trust Musk and these things going on. I mean, if they really want to push things to this sort of dystopic AI government where we're all controlled with algorithms and things, I mean, all these bureaucrats have to go anyway. A lot of these agencies do need to be whittled down and replaced by computers. So just firing a few bureaucrats here and there, it's like his Trump with his migration thing. He's saying he might want to kick out 10 million people. I mean, it's hardly been like a couple 100,000 or something. I mean, I don't know where they're going to get to those numbers. So I think we're just getting played, and it's cute to hear him say these things, but let's just see whether he really gets to it.
No, all right. So we're in agreement there, and I think that you hit on another point that I don't think people get, and they get blinded by this, again, right, left, I'm a conservative thing. They have all these blind spots, and I think Trump himself has some blind spots. Number one, when you are moving into automation and artificial intelligence as the norm, you are going to have to whittle out humans. NASA has been a huge part of that, by the way, over the past 2 to 3 decades in automation, in whittling down humans. Now, you have all these bureaucracies. I think, again, they pushed to the limits their censorship, their transgender stuff, which is really transhuman stuff, to the breaking point of where they could not only rig narratives but elections the last time around. Over these next 4 years, and we'll see what happens after, I think the movement is into taking humans out of most of the equations, moving AI in as the norm. In other words, even, the automated phone calls that you get that used to be people in another country, or even something that was a recording that might go to a scam artist, fully going to be AI in the next 2 to 3 years. That's one of the very small things that you're going to see. But many of these agencies and bureaucracies are, number one, they're going to have to turn towards that. But to power that is going to be extremely expensive. They'd rather spend it on these data centers that Google, Facebook, Amazon are all building right now. Zuckerberg's got that one. I think it's out in, in Kentucky, that is like 60 plus billion and 3/4 of the size of Lower Manhattan. That's one facility, folks. One facility. So I think a lot of people are getting duped in that sense. And things like, obviously, Stargate, the mRNA technology, they're going to keep trying to push that forward. I hope that RFK Jr. can pump the brakes. I hope we get massive disclosures on, the assassinations and things like 9/11. I think all that's extremely necessary. I'm 100% skeptical with you. But if you want to burn down a system, if you put some things out there that are so egregious but still limited, you can certainly accelerate that process. Well, what are your thoughts? I know I went on a big rant there, but overall, that's what it looks like to me, at least, like you said, the people that are funding these things, the powers that be on one side, they feel like, again, they've pushed a lot of their agenda. They can push some more, a different flavor of it through this administration.
Yeah, what's your question?
So do you agree that and what do you see as some of these technological aspects that they will be pushing through in the next 3 to 4 years when we are talking about automation, AI transitions? What can we expect? And also in the financial systems that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we're just seeing more and more automation, more and more AI usage. It's just all these big tech oligarchs are just obsessed with AI, everything, AI government, and they're floating all these stupid ideas that these things are autonomous, that somehow someone doesn't program them. For the making of the CBDC film, I went digging through Sam Altman clips, and I mean, he clearly says in one interview, whoever programs the AI is the controller of the AI. AI is not autonomous at all. So, but maybe they want to trick us and say, oh, look, the AI government took over, and like, it's Skynet now, and it's just like some creepy guys in the background programming it. I mean, but they're floating all this idea that it could be this autonomous thing that's going to take over, and da, 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 da. So yeah, it's interesting too, all the computing power used for Bitcoin now, and could that be retooled later to process the AI needs in the future? So it's just these things are concerning, but yeah, I mean, my CBDC film really covered kind of the Internet of Bodies, Internet of Things, tokenization of all assets, the digital IDs, and just maybe mentioned a little of this AI stuff. But it's really now this film, this issue is really how a big economic collapse is being engineered, how legal rights to take people's savings was put in place, and then these other control systems start to make more sense and seem a little less insane, or like overly ambitious. I mean, they've really has been put in place a legal structure to take all of your stocks and bonds, liquidate the market in this kind of 1929 style collapse. And then, because really, it's kind of interesting. Back at that time, gold was the financial basis of the foundation of the financial system. So you had the 1920s. They started giving all these speculative loans to buy stocks. People could put down $10 and get 100, and then go buy $100 of stock. And then in 1929, they basically called in a lot of these loans, crashed the market. Then from 29 to 33, all these banks were failing. And 33, FDR seized everyone's gold, was the basis of the system. Now the basis of the system is really everyone's securities. It's everyone's stocks and bonds kept in these pooled forms of the central clearinghouses. And from there, they're being played with then 15 to 20 times over. So now it looks like there's a plan to collapse the derivatives market and take the collateral, take the underlying stocks and bonds that are the current foundation of the economic system. So this really needs to be, this hole needs to be plugged. We can pass these laws at the state level, and then that will just wind itself down. It can be a peaceful wind down. But if we don't, the concern is that these economic crises will see the derivatives market implode, all of our stocks and bonds will be taken, and we'll be shit out of luck.
So listen, I want to talk about that, because you didn't allude. You said you believe they're trying to do a controlled demolition of the economy. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in that controlled demolition, that's where the proletariat gets stripped of what they think are their assets. Those assets are then encumbered to those that control the banking system and the resource and financial markets. It's scammed up that way. But then you have to bring in a different system, and that's kind of where we're talking about CBDCs, digital currencies. All of a sudden, you don't own anything. That's the bad case scenario, the worst case scenario, let's say.
Yeah.
At the same time, we realize we're on this bubble that's backed by nothing, and you're talking about a system where there's awareness, where they can't strip us of the assets, but essentially the monetary market in its current form also has to fail. What does it get substituted with? What does that look like? Because we're still pushing into the future, and they're going to try to push it digital no matter what, whether they take our stuff or not. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, what do we need to do to ensure not only that we keep our assets, but that the next system put in place doesn't move into the nightmare scenario that we just talked about, where there's kind of like this instant moment and controlled demolition where just our assets are completely stripped of us. Stop It, The Great Taking is the documentary, and you can check out the interview series as well. Final break. We'll have more Making Sense of the Madness after this. Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here. Let you know that Making Sense of the Madness is changing for a bit. Soon enough, we're going to be moving to a more commentary-driven show, which airs live on my socials. Now, we hope to get some minor sponsors at $1,000 a piece each month and move it back in the direction of what you just saw with those great interviews with people who have done deep research. Now, until then, I really do need your support individually as well. Consider donating via the links down below, especially the Buy Me a Coffee, $5, $10, $15. It does mean the world to me, and it keeps this broadcast moving. Thank you so much, Bermas Brigade, for your continued support. And we are back. So, James, what have you? We talked about the nightmare scenario. Now you kind of talk about the slow burn scenario, which is, I guess, the most positive that we could possibly do. I guess that also kind of incorporates whether the IRS is going to be around, the current tax system, the Federal Reserve, you name it. But we're still on this massive bubble, right, that's based on nothing. And it has to stop at some point. I love local legislation. I think that comes through awareness. You discussed Tennessee. I believe you said South Dakota, not North Dakota.
That was in South Dakota.
South Dakota, not North Dakota. So that's 2 out of 50. How do we reach the other 48? How do we pass that legislation? And then what does it look like if we don't give up our assets, but we move into another system?
Well, I think it's important to have assets outside the system, or that you have clear title to. So your land or gold or cash, you directly own it. Land can be taxed by the state. So the issue is if the issue is not just 130 trillion that could be lost. If everyone loses all their savings, they can't make their home payments. They can't make all these other payments. Their property goes into default. You see these chains of default. So it could be more than 130 trillion collapsing. It could be 200 or 300 trillion. And this really threatens to take down the whole economy. You see this kind of society-wide collapse, like in the Great Depression period, where even very wealthy people basically became destitute. So I think people need to understand that you can save your own behind. You can shore up your own situation, but it's really important that we fix this issue at the local level to make sure we don't have to go through that. Because a lot of times I meet people, they're like, oh, how do I hide from this? Where do I go? What do I buy? Da, 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 da. And they don't want to stay and fight and change anything. They just want to run away to some other country, or, go to the woods or whatever. And I think that kind of suits these bad guys, because they don't want anyone to put up a fight. They want to take the smart people off the battlefield, just opt out, like Timothy Leary in the 60s. The CIA.
That was CIA funded, yeah.
Gave them all this LSD to promote, to make people idiots. And he said, "Oh, tune in, turn on, drop out." So I hear a lot of that in the libertarian circles, and people say, "Oh, where do I bug out to?" But we really got to stay and fight and fix this thing, because if we don't, we're screwed. And the societal ramifications, it's going to be a society you don't want to really live in. So, back to the securities issue, I think, as individuals, if you do ask your broker for the physical share certificate, then you're taking the security out of dematerialized form, and you do have a certificate that you do have clear title to. So that's one thing you can do to protect yourself against what I'm talking about here with the banks using it. If you get the physical share certificates, you are protected. But let's be clear that in the markets are made up, 95% of the markets are made up of institutional funds like IRAs, pension funds. All these big mutual funds, all these funds don't have share certificates. They're all completely dematerialized. You can't get the underlying stocks. So if the market goes down, you might be able to, okay, I have these share certificates, but 95% of the rest of the market went belly up, and everyone lost their savings. So this is really, these guys are kind of going for everything. They're going for the juggler. They're really going for world communism. I got really galvanized when the whole COVID thing started. I've been reading about all these conspiracy things and who's behind stuff for 15 years. And I was like, but then they really, they weaponized the UN and started issuing all these insane orders.
No,
And I was like,
everybody out there that was a skeptic was always like, the United Nations is a paper tiger and it doesn't have any real power. And then
Right.
all of a sudden, through suggestions, the United Nations and the World Health Organization were dictating authoritarian mandates throughout the Western world that you could not escape from. And all us kooks that have been talking about global governance and a quote-unquote new world order were vindicated in many ways, shape, and forms.
Unfortunately.
And I guess, in these final 5 minutes of the broadcast, you mentioned the idea, people ask you, what do I have to do to protect myself? And you talked about fighting, you talked about securities, et cetera. What are your thoughts on parallel economies, right? Because there's also a lot of those talks in libertarian circles. And I'm all for supporting your local business, supporting each other, et cetera. But when we are talking about those type of economies, unfortunately, I think they can only go so far. Like when we're talking about narrative management and the sharing of ideas and platforms, it's a rigged game at this point. There are no platforms that are coming up without billions of dollars or big money. People can sit there and act like X is a free speech platform. It's not. Go ask its own AI. It will tell you it is not a meritocracy. They pick winners and losers. They have an algorithm. Rumble, not a free speech platform. Much better than everything else. Funded by billionaires like Peter Thiel, who are involved in defense contracting, Palantir, their, Bilderberg steering members. Jens Stoltenberg, the latest steering member, the ex-head of NATO, everybody. These are the type of players that are running the narrative management. So what are your thoughts on those parallel economies? What do they actually look like? And how far can they go with, I guess, the digital and oligarchical authoritarian restrictions we have going on the planet right now?
Yeah, I've since the COVID thing, I heard a lot about parallel economies, and a lot of it's more talk than it is like real action. But it's a little utopic. I mean, people they talk like, oh, if you just buy Bitcoin and then go sit on a farm, then you're free or something. I mean, we still have all these societal issues of a government gone nuts, stealing all of our stuff. We got oligarchs promoting massive state actions to restrict people. And we really need to stop it in order to be free. So yeah, I mean, look, if they get the CBDCs in place and they destroy the economy and push us into a really more poor, kind of primitive, less efficient economy that's controlled, we'll have to transact in the black market, and then you'll have your parallel economy there. Where you're just trading things with people, but you're going to see higher prices, less efficiencies. It's just going to be like higher rates, for everything. It'll be like 20% conversion rate just to trade your eggs for your shoes or whatever. So I don't think they'll ever get like total control, or there'll always be kind of black markets and things, but yeah, I don't know. You're right. There's this kind of utopic thing about parallel economies. I mean, just I guess stop buying things. Buy from local farmers and buy some local stuff. And I don't think we need to give it a fancy name like parallel economy or.
I think, again, supporting your local economy. Again, I think a lot of the conservatives mean well. Some of them have started their own banks, like you talked about with Bitcoin and decentralization. The thing is that once they get you, like they'll act like, well, if they don't have your keys, they can't do anything with it. Well, I always go to that case out in Germany that's like almost a year old, maybe even a year old at this point, where there was that movement of like 2 billion in Bitcoin at the time, and people were like screaming, Satoshi has shown his face. No, it was the German government putting 2 guys that had a pirate site back between 2006 and I think 2013 that bought a bunch of Bitcoin with their money in a room, charging them with crimes, got their keys, and took their money. They took their Bitcoin. Because that's what happens when you're in a room with people that'll be like, hey, you can tell us, or we'll break your finger, or we'll take your hand, or, we'll cut your arm. I mean, that's the thing. Unless you're literally willing to die on your sword for this digital money, they can access it. Okay, period. There's no perfect cryptocurrency. There's no perfect currency in the world, in my opinion. And I think that's why people have to remain informed and be willing to navigate the situations that are led before us. Ignorance is not bliss. We're not going to get huge wins all the time, but we don't have to be doomer gloomer all the time, because if we are and we don't fight back, it can go beyond that doom and gloom. We've got about a minute left in the broadcast. What would you like to leave the audience with, and how can they support your work?
Yeah, you can watch this film at thegreattakingreport.com. And so basically, I'm also doing a monthly exposition on this issue for people that want a more technical background. So you can find that at thegreattakingreport.com as well. But basically, yeah, if you could donate for the film, or all of my work can be seen at bigpicture.watch. This bigpicture.watch. And yeah, I'm trying to help people understand the interplay between all these things. Central bank digital currencies, we had the COVID thing, the control of food, and now really this threat against all of our life savings. So I would really encourage people to call your state legislators, and there's a legal team in place that'll write the bills for your state reps, and that's at truenorthpublicpolicy.com. That's TRU northpublicpolicy.com. So again, I think right now we just need to get people more educated on this issue and to apply pressure to the state level. But there are some good things happening. A lot of states are passing gold depository bills. So I think the strategy for U.S. is really to break it up and kind of pit us against one another. But I think we're going to go through probably a rough time if these markets collapse, the securities are taken, we're pit against one another, and then you get into some kind of a civil war narrative. That seems to be the kind of direction they're trying to take things. So
a discussion for another time. I think if they were able to get that kind of civil unrest, it would be in pockets, and in reality, not a real civil war. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be very real that they brought in authoritarian government mandates and martial law everywhere and put the final nail in the coffin of what was once a great constitutional republic. James Patrick, everybody, I want to thank him. I want to thank you guys for watching this show right here on Patriot.tv 5 days a week, where the truth lives. Remember, this guy, it is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I love you guys, and we'll see you on the flip side. Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here. Let you know that making sense of the madness is changing for a bit. Soon enough, we're going to be moving to a more commentary-driven show, which airs live on my socials. Now, we hope to get some minor sponsors at $1,000 a piece each month and move it back in the direction of what you just saw with those great interviews with people who have done deep research. Now, until then, I really do need your support individually as well. Consider donating via the links down below, especially the Buy Me a Coffee, $5, $10, $15. It does mean the world to me, and it keeps this broadcast moving. Thank you so much, Bermas Brigade, for your continued support.